Okay, so I am Julie Ray, and I'm the assistive technology person for the Duluth Public Schools and Region 3 of Minnesota. I know most of you here. It's good to see you. And we do office hours every week. Just a reminder that upcoming sessions, we've got next week is Lighthouse Center for Vital Living with Sherry Cook. She's going to talk about the AT lending library that they have available and the services available through them. December 1st, the Northern Lights Special Ed Co-op AT team. Shannon just popped into the meeting too. She's going to be part of that group presenting their low-tech AT kits that they're sharing out and having some great success with. So that'll be a fun one on December 1st. December 8th, Tara Bruss is going to be coming to talk to us about the Pacer Simon Technology Center library, another great resource for borrowing tools. So I always talk about why we're doing office hours, and of course it's about sharing great resources around the region. Since I work both at the district and regional level, it's nice to be able to share those resources out more widely. I also threw in here too, when we think about the work that we're doing, high leverage practices by the Council for Exceptional Children. These are 22 practices that when we use them as teachers, they cause the most progress in student performance. And one of those is using assistive and instructional technologies. So AT can be really important. As we get started here, I just want to say a little plug for Universal Design for Learning. CAST are the people who came up with the UDL guidelines. It's a great way, a great framework for thinking about things in terms of getting students exactly what it is they need. We talk about that a lot in this group. But we talk a lot of times about getting students access, and that is one level of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that, there's a link there, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with any of you about that. This is a slide that we always have in there, and today is actually our topic of discussion, the SETT Framework. And I always say we look at the student, the environments, the tasks, and then we look at that overlay of tools to support the student. And of course, it's a great tool to use from a lens of equity to make sure that every student gets exactly what it is they need. And today we're going to dig more deeply into that framework of looking at assistive technology. So what even is the SETT framework that Julie keeps talking about and people have probably heard about other places, and where did it come from? So as its name implies, it's a framework for considering assistive technology. It was developed by Joy Zabala, and her website is linked there. There are a lot of really good resources on that website. I would encourage you to check it out. I sometimes use the term process, and I'll call it the SETT process, but it's not a process or a form. It's not a specific form. It's a framework. There can be processes and forms that are set up that use the SETT framework, but just kind of a reminder that it's not necessarily a process or a form, but those can be based on the SETT framework. Now, since this is a regional training, there are people here from different co-ops and districts and schools. I linked in here the Duluth Public Schools AT Consideration Guide that we developed a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, and have updated since through the MDE AT Teams project. So that was a big project, but the form has proved useful, but it's based on the SETT framework. And Duluth Edison also has a form based on the SETT framework and adapted from that initial form that we developed in Duluth Public Schools. And Northern Lights, very similar form. So just know that you have links to those things if you're in one of those groups. And if you're in a different group, a different co-op, school, or district, I would love to hear about what you have available there. We're working on compiling all those resources too, so that they're available at everyone's fingertips. There are also tons of other forms and guides available, again, based on that SETT framework. If you just Google it, the WADI, the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, has a good one. I mentioned Joy Zabala's webpage. That's a scaffold for consideration of AT needs. Region 10 of Minnesota also has some great things in their AT manual. We're going to talk about the MDE AT manual a little further down the road, and I'll have a link to that too. But I guess the point here is that to use the SETT framework, there are a bunch of different guides and forms that are based on that. What order do I do it? Do I have to do student, then environment, then tasks, then tools? Not necessarily. You'll find that as you go through this framework or the processes that have been developed based on that framework, you kind of look at each of those things and you'll notice that you're jumping from student to environment to tasks to environment to student. And so those things kind of pop all over the place. The one thing I would say is that tools tends to be the last piece that you look at. So you want to have all that other information in place, and then the tools become the piece that you look at once you have all that other information. This infographic is from the Council for Exceptional Students. This was brought to our attention by Brooke Pacharek through Duluth Edison, and it's a great visual, and we'll look through each of these pieces as we go through. So they've got the S for the student strengths, current performance and weaknesses in reading, math, writing, communication, learning and studying, and the list goes on. You'll notice that I'm going to pop over here for a second. This is the Duluth Public Schools guide, and I'm sure the print is quite small on your screen, but there's an area there to identify areas of concern, vision, orientation, and mobility, and the list goes on. But again, looking at those elements of the student. From the Minnesota Department of Ed AT manual, these are the questions that they say to consider. Again, student strengths. You want it to be student focused based on their strengths. Then you also need to look at the functional area or areas of concerns. What is it that the student has difficulty doing, or that it's impossible to do independently at this time? Are they reliant on another adult? Are there special needs related to that area of concern that the student has? And then, of course, looking at their current abilities related to that area of concern. You want to talk about expectations and concerns also, and interests and preferences. So when we talk about all these questions, like where are we getting that information from? You want this to be a collaborative process. I've got a slide a little later on with some more information about that, but how are we gathering this information? You want it to be a true team input piece. So that includes the student themselves. You want it to be student-centered, the family, you as a teacher or case manager, of course, related service providers, community members if they're doing work in the community. All of those pieces, you want to make sure that you're gathering information from all of those important people on the team. A lot of the information based on the student, on the Duluth Public Schools form, it says right here, if your team members are all knowledgeable about this student, you can simply keep these things in mind as you go through the next steps rather than writing down a description on this form. So a lot of times if we've just done a 3-year reevaluation, we know a ton of this information and it's written in there. It's not that you need to reiterate it. It's that you need to hold all that knowledge in mind as you're going through that. So one of the things that I said that we would do as this session was that we would think about one of your own students. So I would encourage you now, I'm going to pause for about a minute here, and I would like for you to think about what do you know about your student? And then looking at that list of questions, I'll put them back on the screen as I pause for a minute. What else might you need to find out, and how could you do that? So again, I'll pause for just a second here. I would also like to point out just to everyone who is here that my mom just joined this session. I'm so excited. Hi, Mom. All right, that was a pretty quick pause to think about all of those questions, but did anyone have any thoughts on the student portion of the SET framework? And Shannon just said, hi, thanks, Julie's mom, and she just dropped out, so we'll see if she joins back in. Any thoughts on the student portion of the SET framework? Okay, I'll keep plugging along, but if as we go through, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat window, pick up the mic, whatever's most comfortable for you. All right. Then let's talk about the environment. E is for the learning environment. How is the classroom arranged? What materials and equipment are already in place? How is instruction given? Small groups, whole class, all of those pieces. So those are things that you think about in terms of the environment. And again, here's from the MDEAT manual. You want to think about the physical arrangement of the classroom. This could be important for a number of different reasons. The instructional setup of the classroom and then also the physical instruction. So, we mentioned orientation and mobility. Of course, that would be very important for a physical setup. But there's a lot of other situations too where we think about maybe it's beneficial for a student to be at the front of the classroom so that they can hear or see better or attend better. So just things to think about for the arrangement of the classroom or other setting, not necessarily just the classroom. That's the other thing too, is that we need to be looking at multiple environments, not necessarily just the classroom. Think about the support that's available to both the student and the staff. Are there paraprofessionals available? Is there one teacher in the classroom? What does that look like? And how many students are in the classroom? The materials and equipment, of course, we think about that kind of forefront when we're thinking about assistive technology, but this might be some of those things that are universal design for learning that everyone has access to. Then just thinking about access issues too. Is this individual able to access the technology, physical access within the spaces that they're in, and instructional access too? Also want to be thinking about attitudes and expectations. If you're going to be trying to implement some piece of technology in those settings, how do the staff and the family, the student, other members of the team, what are their attitudes and expectations surrounding that? Just like one example, thinking about environment, I'll take it to an AAC, augmentative and alternative communication and example. And so when you're thinking about that, where does a student communicate? For example, a student might communicate in the classroom and in the lunchroom and in the pool and on the playground and at home. So those have some very different important pieces to think about. For example, you wouldn't want to take a high-tech AAC device into the pool so much, although some of them now might have that capability, but it would be a feature to think about if it was something that could get wet or not. And then also you'd be wanting to think about the portability of it if they're going from place to place to place. If it's loud in the lunchroom, it might need to have a speaker that's quite loud. So again, just one example that kind of points out that the factors in the environment can be really important. So now again, thinking through the student that you have on your caseload, think about what do you know about your student in terms of the environments that they're in and what might you need to find out? Can you think about some elements of the environment that might be important when considering your student that you have in mind? And I'll pause for just a minute here. All right, super quick pause. We're just whipping through information here, but any thoughts on the environment factor when thinking about the SETT framework? All right, I'll move on to tasks. And the tasks piece, that's where we ask what is the class or what are the other students expected to be able to do, including this student, and which tasks are essential for your child to be successful. This again is from the MDEAT manual, but what specific tasks occur in the environments that help progress toward mastery of IEP goals and objectives? That's an important piece when we're thinking about tasks, making sure that it's tied to the IEP, because that's where we're essentially outlining what it is that the team has decided that the student will be targeting. And the more specific we are about those tasks, the better we're able to do feature matching. We'll talk about that in a second when we get to the tools. And again, these can be related to basically any area that you're looking at. So what are the tasks required for that active involvement in those environments? Some of the questions on the Duluth form here is, you can see where we've got tools outlined, and it's like thinking about what are some tools that are already being used. What have you already tried? What was tried? And are there strategies in places that might help the student? And then thinking about additional tools too. But you'll notice that if up in here in the tasks section, I've highlighted again, this should be tied to the goals and objectives. The more specific you are, the easier it becomes when you start to look at tools. So I would encourage you now, thinking about the students that you have on your caseload or the one that you've chosen to think about today, are there things, tasks that you specifically would hope that your student would do? Again, thinking within the framework of that IEP. And this might be a time too where you're thinking, okay, first let's think about the tasks, and then let's think about the environments where we'd want them to do that. So again, that order doesn't matter. That's the part of the beauty about those first elements of the SETT framework. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to tools. Again, jump in if you've got any comments or questions. The tools, I think, are what people usually think of when they think of assistive technology. What are the things that we are going to put in place that might help a student perform in a more independent way or with a higher level of accuracy? And again, as pointed out in this CEC infographic, you want to look at low and no tech, mid-level tech, and up all the way up through high tech. And a student might be using things from all of those categories. The MDEAT manual notes that this can include devices, services, strategies, trainings, accommodations, and modifications. So it's not necessarily just the actual thing, but it's how that thing is going to get implemented also. And I would encourage you to check out your individual district or school form. They might talk about where there's a place to go for resources. There are a number of AT libraries we'll talk about in just a second. But the feature matching piece is important to think about. Like, what are those actual elements of the item that are going to be important for that tool? In the example that I gave of an AAC device, we said it needs to be loud for the cafeteria. That's a feature that would be important, would be a speaker, or maybe a speaker that produces any certain volume or adjustable volume. So those would be things, the features, the things about the specific tools that would be important given the student, the environment, and the tasks. There are lots of lending libraries out there. We've been doing a couple sessions on these lately. We had Amy Perrin from STAR. Next week, we're going to have Sherry from Lighthouse. Then in a couple of weeks, we'll have Tara from Pacer. There's people sometimes have their local libraries in their schools or co-ops or districts. And Region 3 also has an AT lending library. So there's a lot of places where we can get resources. So just know that things are out there for the borrowing once you decide what it is you want to use. And then the forms that I linked to, so each individual district or co-op's forms, like for example, on the Duluth Public Schools form, there's a list of possible examples of tools that might be helpful. And as it says here, consider the student, the environments, and the tasks using the first page of this form, and then moving on to that whole list. Of course, I'm just scrolling through it just so you can see. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to read all this as I'm doing that, but it's arranged by area of concern. And then there are just several examples within each of those areas that are just some possible options. All right. So I'm going to pause right there and actually have you now thinking with your particular student, now that you know this, about the student, thought about the environment and the tasks, now just thinking about the tools for just a minute. And I won't pause too long, but just know that sometimes this is a place where people get stuck and they think, okay, I know exactly what it is, the task that I need to trial or I need to look at, but I'm a little bit stuck on tools. And that's why sometimes reaching out to these lending libraries, they can be really good resources in helping to point out some of those pieces. I'll give you a couple final thoughts and wrap up, and then we'll make sure we can jump in to have some Q&A for you guys, questions and answers. Keep in mind that AT consideration using the SETT framework or another framework, regardless of the process or forms that you're following, it's an ongoing collaborative process. It's never like, done, we did it, it's done. But AT must be considered at least annually as a legal requirement for students on an IEP. I just included an article by Joy Zabala there about resetting, doing the set and reset, so going through it again. And then it's super important to be collaborative about this. I mentioned that before about getting multiple people from your team doing teamwork. If you've got a Google form, it's nice to be able to share out that Google form, have people give their input on it. It can be a really collaborative process that way. The CEC has some tips for, it talks about the SETT framework and evaluating AT remotely, but they have some really good tips about collaboration in there. And high leverage practices, which we talked about at the beginning, collaboration is a whole section of those high leverage practices, numbers 1 through 3. They listed it first because it's so important. And then I just want you to be thinking about what is your next step. That's something about is it going to be a follow-up about the process to ask your director or people in your co-op or district what their process is? Is it based on the SETT framework? Is it going to be to find a tool that fits that student environment and tasks that you are thinking about today? Is it going to be to collaborate with a family and find out more information about a student? But I would like you to take just a minute and jot down what is your next step. What are you, either as an individual or as part of a team, what is your next step going to be regarding the SETT framework? And I would love to open it up for questions and answers here. Feel free to type in the chat window or to unmute yourself, whatever you're more comfortable with. I would happily answer or try to answer or point you in the right direction. Any questions that you've got? I'll stop screen sharing.
Julie, that form that you had that listed all the areas of concern and the sample, I had that list and I can't find it. Can you share that with me, or somehow can I get a copy of that?
Absolutely. It's linked in the slides on that first, hold on. It's on slide 11, what does my school or district do? That one is actually the Duluth Public Schools AT Consideration Guide. I'll copy this link too and drop it in the chat window right now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So Julie, yeah. I've got some students in from Superior that have their stuff read to them And so you and I are going to have to connect because, or do I connect with Shiloh? Because I'm going to have some of their stuff read to they can't read, but if they hear it, they can pass the tests. And so I'm in that stuck spot now with new kids coming in. So I'm going to need your help.
I am so happy to help you with text-to-speech options, because that was a beautiful, like, 30-second set summary right there, Deb. It was like, there's students who have great auditory comprehension but can't decode. That's the student. They're in this environment. They're taking tests. The task that they need to do is to listen to to access the text. Access. Is it hard copy or digital text right now, Deb?
Right now it's hard copy, and between the parent and myself or my student teachers, we're trying to read stuff to them and scribe the tests for them and do all of this stuff. And we just don't have the bodies or the time to continue to do that.
And that's a super good point. When we talk about the supports, we really want to look at independence, because we want them to be able to do that, rather than having 7 adults in the room trying to support that. It becomes a really big workload item. So yeah, we'll touch base on that, but those are the types of things within the tasks that are important too. Like, is it hard copy text or digital text? It'll be a very different tool that we'll look at, knowing that it's hard copy text, whether we might have to make it digital. So.
And is it that pen that I trialed many years ago with one student?
Deb is talking about a C-Pen reader, which is, it's a great tool for some hard copy text. You take a pen, it's shaped kind of like a pen, it drags across the text and reads the text aloud. So that is a great one for hard copy text. Kind of depends on some of the specifics. Sometimes students are better off making the text digital and then, finding a way to do that and then reading it. But
okay.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk specifics, but that's a perfect example of kind of how those specific pieces impact the SETT process. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
Any other questions, comments?
Julie, I was just going to say thanks for posting all your updated documents, because all of our AT consideration documents we stole from you. I think we talked about it at one point. I didn't steal them, but they're really great to have those to model our forms after. Thank you.
Beautiful, you bet. And we actually, did an update not too long ago. Kind of, again, really highlighting that SETT framework within that form. And so, it's an ongoing process to keep the forms updated too, because, technology changes every 30 seconds. So, it's great. Oh, and we just developed too a set of ECSE forms, early childhood special ed forms, which hopefully will be helpful for people, which are linked in that initial one for the Duluth Public Schools too. It's kind of a pilot. We're trying them out and looking for feedback. So, yeah.
Nice. I'm going to look at those too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording. Thanks everyone for showing up. I can't believe